and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah.
And tonight we will be discussing Harrow the Ninth.
Harrow the Ninth. Literally only you says Harrow.
But before we get into that discussion, Sarah, what's something great that happened recently?
Something great that happened recently. I went to the opera with one of our aunts, and it was delightful. And also, it was only 90 minutes, and there was no intermission, and I was still feeling kind of sick, so I got to go home, which was really nice. And also, they don't actually look in your bag, so we smuggled in champagne, and we didn't have to pay $35 for an way overpriced glass of mediocre champagne. Because, the opera charges a ridiculous amount for a glass of champagne.
Yeah, you just threw a lot of information at me, and I don't know what to react to first. $35?
Maybe it wasn't $35, but it was definitely at least $25 for one glass of champagne. Ridiculous.
Yeah, and it was Cook's or some shit.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was completely mediocre. It was not worth $25, which is why I was really pleased with my suggestion that we smuggle champagne in.
Good.
Yes, that is in fact what I will be doing from now on. Sorry, SF Opera, you didn't hear it from me.
Well, my next comment is that maybe all of that smuggled champagne is part of why you're not feeling great. It has to be said. I would be a hypocrite if I pretended that I only drank when I was in tip-top health, but I am a hypocrite, so I'm going to give you shit anyway.
I mean, yes, I probably would have felt better if I hadn't been drinking champagne, but on the other hand, and I'm not making this up, I had a coughing fit in the middle of the opera, which is really awkward because you're trying not to cough because there's stuff going on stage and you feel really bad about coughing. And I did also smuggle in water. So I drank some water. I was hoping that would help my throat, and it didn't. And I drank champagne, and the bubbly in the champagne actually did genuinely help my cough.
Champagne, it's medicine.
So yes.
Oh, well, my good thing is actually a good thing.
My good thing was going to the opera. That's genuinely a good thing.
All right. So, whisker face. When cats make whisker face, that's my good thing. It's the existence of whisker face.
And that is a good thing.
So, sometimes a cat will turn to look, behind them or something, and their whiskers will hit themselves. And that is obviously uncomfortable, right? Because it's whiskers made to sense the area around them. And so if they're bumping into their own shoulder, they make this, their little lip goes up in just the cutest sneer. And that is whisker face. They're just making the silliest little expression because their whiskers incidentally bumped into the environment around them. And, well, specifically, Bard did that today. But also, I would just like to remind everyone that cats do that sometimes. And I hope that brings them as much comfort as it does me day to day.
You hope it brings listeners as much comfort, or the cats as much comfort?
Listener, I don't think cats enjoy it at all.
Okay, because your sentence, you hope that it brings them as much comfort as it does you, definitely seem to refer to cats.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I would like to remind everyone that whisker face exists. And I hope that fact brings them as much comfort as it does me.
Okay.
And they can just imagine cats making just that little They're not actually uncomfortable, but they're just making the silliest little face. And it's so good.
It's a good face.
It's a very good face. Well, Sarah, what are you drinking on this fine Monday evening? It's weird. We don't usually record on Mondays. I'm all discombobulated.
We also don't usually record quite this late.
That's a lie.
No, we
don't start recording this late.
we usually, even when we are recording late, it's usually not starting quite this late. I am drinking cider because I had my father over for dinner, and we had cider. And so I am recording after some amount of cider and continuing to drink cider.
Is it the tried and true?
The cider that I was drinking with my father was Golden State cider because that is available from Safeway. And my father doesn't quite like to spend as much on local cider as I do for some reason. I mean, Golden State is local, like it's from California. I think it's even from Northern California, but it's also available at the grocery store. And so not quite as boutique. But I am now, yes, drinking the tried and true Blindwood. How could I not?
How could you not? I am drinking a Moscow Mule.
Nice.
Yes. Not of the caliber you would get from a bar. Well, hopefully. If you're paying enough money to get a cocktail from a bar, it better be made with better ingredients than the bullshit I had at home. Otherwise, what's the point?
That's very true.
But it's good.
I'm glad you're enjoying your Moscow Mule.
Thank you. We recorded yesterday. Have you read anything since then?
I have, actually.
Oh, no shit.
I have, because we were supposed to record yesterday evening in addition to yesterday morning, and we didn't record yesterday evening, so I had yesterday evening to read.
That's lies and slander.
That is not lies and slander. It's 100% true.
No, it's true. But I'm glad that we pushed the recording because that meant I got to actually spend as much time with this book as it deserved. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have pushed the recording, but it did give me a little bit more reading time. So I had started previously The Origins of the Wheel of Time by Michael Livingston, and I was able to read the bulk of it and finish it last night. I had a couple of disagreements with his chapter on how Robert Jordan mirrored Tolkien. We're not going to go into that in this episode.
There's not enough hours in the day.
Yes, this is not the episode for that discussion, but overall it was a really good book. I really enjoyed the look into Robert Jordan's process and seeing some of the real world references that he wove into his Wheel of Time series that I didn't catch when I was reading the Wheel of Time.
Wonderful.
So I do in fact have an answer to that question.
Well,
I'm assuming you do not.
We were supposed to record this episode yesterday. And I have been marathoning the book since then. So I have been all locked tomb all the time. It's not a bad headspace to be in, I'll be honest.
It's not. So I know we had some disagreements about Gideon the Ninth, about that book, but I feel like we actually are probably about on the same page with Harrow.
Okay. Other than the pronunciation of the name.
Other than the pronunciation, which you're obviously wrong.
Although I realized I thought her name was Harrow Hawk.
Harrow Hawk.
It's Harrow Hark. It's Hark.
No, it's Hawk.
It's not.
I don't believe you.
I mean, please look it up.
I am going to look it up.
Because I saw that in the book and I was like, oh, fuck.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
There is an R.
It's Harrow Hark, which changes everything.
I mean, it doesn't change anything except the fact that there's an R there. But if you were pronouncing it Harrow because of Hawk, then yes, it would change the pronunciation.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, even if it was Hawk, it would still be Harrow. But
no, because you want the vowels to be the same sound. Ortis would agree with me.
Well, Ortis,
and I'm standing by that statement.
Ortis, I don't think has a leg to stand on, given his poetry.
I'm sure I have no idea what you are implying. Well, I also stand by everything I said about the ending of the first book. Ooh, really quick. Hey, friends, we're talking about the second book of a series. We are absolutely 100% going to be spoiling Gideon the Ninth, because that is the first book in this series, and there is no way to talk about the sequel without spoiling it. So, stop. Go away. It's not worth it. We love you, but go away.
I can tell you how to talk about the second book without spoiling the first book, and that is to not remember the first book at all, because it's been like a year, and I did not remember anything in Gideon.
Holy shit, dude. I was like, oh, let me go like read a summary. Did not help. There's the dramatis personae at the beginning. Also did not help.
I looked up the Wikipedia page for Gideon the Ninth because I was like, I started reading Harrow and I was like, I don't remember anything that happened in Gideon. Yeah, I don't remember anything at all. And that helped a little bit, but it didn't help enough.
So I would actually argue that a part of that tumultuous confusion is 100% intended because a lot of this book is following.
Okay.
Yes.
I disagree there. I'll let you
Really?
finish your thought, but I do disagree. Yes.
Harrow is confused. And now that it's Harrow Hark, it's not Harrow Hawk. That's completely different. Anyway, so Harrow is going through a very crazy time at the beginning of this novel, which temporally is not necessarily the beginning of the story, but that's not the point. The point is, I think part of our confused experience is intended.
I disagree there. Not necessarily in the fact that I think that we're supposed to be confused, because yes, Harrow is definitely, she's going through a time, right? Like, that's not spoilers to say she's going through a time. But my confusion, and I don't know how to talk about this in a non-spoilery way.
Well, spoilers for the first book.
No.
I think if I had remembered who any of those characters are, that would have helped a lot.
Okay. Yes, I agree, but I feel like that wasn't where we're supposed to be confused. Because where we're supposed to be confused is the way that what Harrow is. This is kind of a spoiler. Maybe you'll have to cut it out.
Okay, I think it's pretty obvious in the first quarter of the book what's going on with her perspective.
Yes. Okay, exactly. So there are some perspective shenanigans going on. And it's very obvious that there are perspective shenanigans going on. And so the fact that what I was reading didn't align with what I remembered, like, that wasn't confusing to me. And I feel like that's what is supposed to be confusing. Whereas the fact that I didn't remember specifics about who Abigail was, for example, like, that was a thing that, from my perspective, wasn't the intended confusion.
I agree. I think because I was confused about so much, the basic details of the first book were inconsequential. And so I was able to overlook them and just get swept along in the story and then sort of be reminded as I read. For example, you're probably supposed to know that Ianthe became a lictor at the end of the first book. And that took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out.
That I didn't have trouble with, but I think that they also do mention that in the Wikipedia article, which I did read within, like, starting the first chapter or two. So
I mean, I figured out that she was a lictor, but I didn't like actually recall those circumstances until I had gotten through part of this book. And I was like, oh yeah, there was that big showdown. You know, that big showdown that we're not going to talk about. We could talk about it because that's a spoiler for the first book, but we're not going to be mean.
Well, I feel like we also probably don't remember it in good enough detail to actually talk about it.
Yeah, what the fuck? Why would you? Also, all of my problems with the ending of the first book, which I realize are I'm the only person in the world who have my specific problems with the ending of the first book.
Yes,
Everyone else has different problems, and those problems are stupid and wrong. But my problems were reasonable.
I mean, I think your problems are stupid and wrong too.
But they're addressed in this book. And if I had just gone straight from the first book into the second book, I don't think I ever would have stewed with Gideon's like emotional situation in the way that I had. And it would have just kept going, and I would have been so much happier with the plot as a whole. But the book hadn't come out yet. I couldn't just keep reading. And That is the fundamental flaw of a series.
Counterpoint. Yes. The book had actually come out yet. You could have just kept reading.
Okay, theoretically, if I had read the first book when it came out, the second book wouldn't have been out yet.
Okay, theoretically. But when you read the first book, the second book was out. You could have kept reading.
I should have kept reading.
You should have kept reading.
If they had been one book, I wouldn't have even artificially stopped. This is clearly one story. Why is this 2 books? That's stupid and wrong and bad. The publishing industry should be ashamed of itself.
Well, it's 4 books because there are 4 books coming out.
4? I thought it was a trilogy.
I think it was originally a trilogy, but there are now 4 books. Well, there are 3 books that are out. Notre the Ninth came out sometime within the last couple of months, but there is a 4th book, Harrow the Ninth, that is coming out that is part of the series.
I understand a writer wanting to get something done and put it out into the world, and I would never criticize that.
Well, also, I mean, they can't necessarily work on parts 2 if they haven't been paid for parts 1. Like, you know, writers got to make money somehow.
Are we pretending that writers make money? Is that the argument we're working on here?
Writers make a minuscule amount of money. They should make more. I think Tamsyn Muir probably makes a decent amount of money for the Locked Tomb series. Still probably not enough.
I would like to leave capitalism out of this conversation because we are talking about art and how art should be experienced. And I believe that this is a story that should be experienced as one whole. And artificially chopping it up is detrimental to this book.
I don't necessarily disagree, but counterpoint, if this was a fan fiction, right? If you were reading this on AO3 and it was all one series or all one work, and it was the, 600,000 words that it probably is. I haven't looked up how many words it is. You would never have started it.
Darling, I don't read works that are longer than 5,000 words. That's not a good argument.
So I'm saying that you wouldn't have read it.
Yeah, but I don't read long fan fiction. That's different because fan fiction isn't finished.
Well, sometimes it is. The series.
Yes, and that's my problem with it. I hate unfinished things. I want to sit down and I want to read it. I'm a chronic binger. I refuse to watch the most recent season of Stranger Things because I'm going to wait until the show is fucking done and then watch it then. That's not entirely relevant. That's just how I consume stories. I like artificial cliffhangers to try to convince producers to do another installment. That pisses me off. And books do the same thing. And this was bad. The jump between these books only harmed my reading experience.
I don't think it was an artificial cliffhanger, though. I mean, I think that they are telling 2 very different stories, and they have 2 very different endings. And if you are going to split it up, I think it made a lot of sense. Could you have told them all in one book? Sure. But
well, yeah, you would have had a title page in between them. I agree with that.
No, I think having them as 2 separate books, it makes sense.
I would have enjoyed both of them more if I had read them all at once.
Well, that's on you for not reading Harrow immediately after finishing Gideon.
Only me? What about all of the people who read Gideon before Harrow was out?
They don't necessarily have that problem.
That is a circular argument.
I mean, it's true, though. If you had that...
I bet they did.
Some of them, maybe.
Okay, what about all of the theoretical issues with this book that we aren't entirely clear about, but I know exist, that are stupid and wrong and bad, that probably wouldn't happen if people had read them directly in a row?
My understanding of the criticism of Harrow, and I could be wrong because I have not done a deep dive into Locked Tomb reviews and criticism. My understanding is that it's confusing, and I disagree.
Yeah, because it's been a year since I read the first one.
Well, I think that they are complaining about POV changes and things like that, and I disagree that was confusing. So
I agree that it was confusing, but I love it. Anyone who thinks that that's confusing, you're correct. Anyone who thinks that makes this book bad or unenjoyable, go fuck yourself.
And to be fair, I could be wrong about reasons why people don't like this book.
I've heard murmurings of the same thing, though. I think second person is really difficult.
Yeah.
I have no justification for why I enjoy second person as much as I do, but it's so weird. I just have to respect anyone who dares to use it.
Okay, I'm telling on myself when I say this. When I think of second person, I definitely think of second person reader insert fan fiction, which is a whole different beast from second person in published fiction.
You're 100% telling on yourself.
I'm 100% telling on myself. Yes, I know. But like, that's what I think of when I think of second person, which is, again, very different from what this book is doing.
But this book is daring. Muir does weird shit with perspective. She does weird shit with timelines. She does weird shit with the concept of identity. Like, oh my goodness. This book is so
Great.
Aspirational. That's not the right word.
Incredible.
Well, yes.
Wonderful. Full of bones.
It reaches, it pushes itself. And does every aspect land perfectly? Probably not. But Muir fucking tries. And that's such a good thing.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like about this book is the way, and I would say about the series as a whole, but particularly this book, is the way that Muir plays with genre and plays with perspective and plays with expectations.
Every line is blurred.
Yeah.
There are no boundaries in this literary world. And that's such a cool thing.
Yeah. And it's funny, you know, like one of my criticisms of the first book was that the language sometimes felt too modern for me. And I didn't have that problem with this book, which is not because it didn't have very modern language. It absolutely did. I don't know if that was my expectations going in were like more tempered and like I was knowing what I was getting into, or if it just somehow worked better for me in this format than it did in Gideon.
Probably a combination.
It's probably 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting how something that I complained about in the first book is still absolutely present in the second book, but it doesn't bother me at all.
That has to partially be expectations.
Partially, yes, I think it probably is.
Yeah. Something that struck me about this book, well, you brought up genre, and I have a lot of emotions, but I don't think I can bring up any of them without spoiling the book horribly and immensely. So we're not going to talk about that, except that I think this is something that we've brought up about other books before. This novel is not a mystery. There are mysteries. I have a lot of questions that I spent most of the book very much hoping would be answered.
I mean, some of those questions have not been answered by the end of the book. I agree 100%.
But just because there are mysteries does not make this book a mystery. And this is maybe a comment sort of weirdly out of left field, but I'm sure that we have talked about that before about other books. And I just wanted to bring up why this book is not a mystery. It's because I'm not trying to solve it. You can't try. There's so much vague and vast lore in this world. You can't piece together anything because there could be some crazy magic coming out of left field as the answer, or a secret lost person or something out of the past. And so you're not trying to figure out the answer. You're just like, whoa, that's crazy. Gotta remember that for when it gets explained to me later. But as a reader, you trust Muir that she will explain it to you. And sometimes she does. Most of the time she does. And I trust that anything she hasn't, she will explain in a later book. And that's why this is not a mystery. I brought up a problem that probably didn't exist, but I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that it's not a mystery. I think that there are some things that the reader tries to answer for themselves that they can't answer. And there are a lot of things that the reader is just kind of like drawn along.
There are so many questions that you're trying to answer as you read this book but you can't.
Yeah, there's and there's a lot that is left to be answered in subsequent novels, but I agree that it's not a mystery because the reader is not solving one concrete thing that you could have found the answer to earlier in the book if you just looked hard enough.
There are not clues.
Yeah. There are clues to some things, but
right. What's going on with Harrow? That's something that I think, well, I figured out before the book spoon fed it to me.
I did think that was pretty obvious.
I think so too. But the fact that people complain about this book makes me think maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it was so obvious that I don't understand that complaint. But
the fact that those complaints exist, like
yeah, maybe. The answer is probably not that we're just brilliant, because I don't believe that.
I can be both.
It could be, but it's probably not.
Oh, it makes me think that this is mean. I'm sorry in advance, everybody. It makes me think that there were readers of the first book who just really enjoyed how vulgar it was. And don't get me wrong, I also enjoyed how vulgar it was. But if those readers didn't get beyond that surface level and then came into this second book, there was a lot of that like fun brashness missing for quite a chunk of the beginning. And I think maybe they just didn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, the first book, from what Wikipedia tells me, because I don't remember it at all, is very much a very different narrator, or the tone of the narration is very different. So I can understand why going from the one to the other would be jarring.
I agree. The tone is very different, but I think there's a very concrete in-world reason for why that is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
So if you're reading the book, like that's what's going on. I don't know. It's weird. And I think you have to just like at some point swallow the weirdness and say, yes, I'm along for this ride. But if you weren't willing to be along for a weird ride, what were you getting out of Gideon, the first book?
Yeah.
Were you just waiting for tit jokes? Again, those are great and fun, but it's not like the first book wasn't weird. The tit jokes were more consistent.
I mean, I do think that the first book was a little more straightforward than Harrow is.
Yeah, okay. Well, in narration, absolutely.
In narration, also, I mean, I guess this is a narration thing too, but in the way that the mystery plays out,
that's
like,
I would argue that
yeah,
that is a narration.
Yeah,
thing.
like I agree that is probably narration. So it is definitely, I think that your brain has to work less hard when you read it beyond just the difference in tone and all of the, sex jokes that Gideon makes.
Yes. I mean, that's true. But I feel like the first book has enough depth that the second book is not entirely out of left field.
Oh yeah, I definitely don't think it's out of left field. Like I'm not saying they're inconsistent. I'm just saying that I think that the first book is an easier book.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
One of the things that Muir does really well in this book is establishing how badass lictors are. And that's not just this book. She spends the entire first book describing how much better lictors are than any other necromancer, and how meaningful it is for all of these necromancers to try to achieve lictorhood. And then we get half of this book, if not more, talking about how cool and badass the lictors are compared to every other person in the known universe. And then we see what lictors are afraid of. And that, it's not even like a planted payoff necessarily, but it's that cause and effect that is executed so flawlessly. Because you can say, oh, this thing is scary, and that's fine, whatever. But spending a book and a half telling you how powerful and super cool these people are, and then saying, yeah, they piss their pants when they see this other thing. That does so much so elegantly. And that was very, very, very cool.
It was good. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that statement. It was good.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was very well done. The enemies in this book are absolutely terrifying. Because we've spent a book and a half learning how flawless the good guys are. And so when you find out they're still scared of the bad guys, you're like, oh no.
Yeah, although the main bad guys were not what I had the most questions about. I can't say more because I think it would be a spoiler.
I think so too. I'm talking about, I mean, the big magical bad guys.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
There are other antagonists that I agree we cannot discuss at this moment.
Yeah.
So let's release us from this agony. Sarah, why should you read this book? Okay, if you read Gideon the Ninth, just read this book.
Yeah, I mean, that was honestly gonna be my answer. If you haven't read Gideon the Ninth and you're interested in Harrow, well, you should go read Gideon the Ninth and then read this book. And if you like bones and you like science fiction that is genre blending, that does a lot of very, very smart things, you should read this series, but you should still not start with Harrow if you haven't read Gideon.
This series is very gory, but in an almost academic way.
I would say it's gory in a bloodless way. I mean, not that
there's viscera involved.
There's definitely blood involved, but it's very, I guess academic is a good word. I mean, it's
clinical.
Sterile.
Yeah.
Is the word that I was going for. Because yeah, it's not gory in the way that grimdark can be gory, right? Like you're not reading it, or at least I'm not reading it thinking, wow, this is a lot of blood and guts that I didn't need to see. You're thinking, oh, these are a lot of bones that make a lot of sense to be talked about.
I don't know.
But I also really like bones.
I think it depends on people's individual squick. There's a lot of hand stuff in this book that very much bothered me. And it's all supposed to be like super cool, badass stuff with Harrow, like making a fist and then Wolverine shit comes out of her hands, basically. That was a gross simplification, but I'm not wrong.
I mean, I think that if you're bothered by bone stuff and by Harrow manipulating
hands, like the description of bones squirting out of her hands.
I was gonna say like the description of manipulating bones to form structures that are not like native to the human body.
Oh, that's not the problem to me. To me, the problem is the description of the internal becoming external.
Okay, but I think that's a very you problem.
I don't think that that's a uniquely me problem.
I'm not saying it's uniquely you, but I think that it's a you problem.
I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying that this book is very gross. That doesn't interfere with my enjoyment of the book, but I think it should be said.
It's got a lot of bones.
It's got a lot of other junk. It's not just bones. It's got a lot of
bones. The bones are the best part.
Yeah, that's why that's not what we need to warn people about.
But your problem is also a bone problem.
It's the bones squirting out through the gooey parts.
That's just bones being cool.
No, it's the gooey parts getting skewered by bones from the inside that's terrifying.
They're not being skewered, though.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they absolutely are. Just because they heal afterwards doesn't mean they weren't skewered first.
I mean, I think they're being skewered if it's going into the gooey parts, not if it's going out of the gooey parts.
Okay, so they're being exploded by the bones. Is that better?
Yes.
It's not better from a reading perspective, just so you know.
Exploded does also kind of imply that like they're going all over the place, which they don't.
The guts definitely do.
Not really.
Did we read the same book?
I don't think when bones are coming out, I don't think it's an explosion.
They do at least once.
At least once is not the entire 500 pages of this book.
All right. At least once in 500 pages, you're going to have to deal with some gooey guts explosions.
If you had just said you have to deal with gooey guts, I would not argue at all. You do have to deal with gooey guts.
Gory. This whole thing came from me saying it was gory. And then you said, no, it's not. It's bones.
I really don't think it's that gory.
There are very detailed descriptions of human viscera constantly, and the viscera is not always where it is supposed to be. I think that's the definition of gore. Just because the narration is very clinical in the description does not make it not gory.
I do think that narration has an effect on how gory the book is perceived, but that's a different discussion, really. So we should probably table it.
All right. I stand by what I said. This is a very good book. There's a lot of gooey parts. Know what you're getting into.
See, that I don't disagree with. I disagree with calling it gory, but I don't disagree with saying there are gooey parts. Yeah.
All right. Sarah says it's not gory, but she agrees that it's gooey. Apparently, yes. Those are different.
They are.
You'll just have to find out for yourself. To avoid spoilers, skip to 1:01:21.
Okay, so we have talked a little bit about how Muir plays with POV. And I think it's absolutely brilliant the way that the second perspective, second point of view, turns into first point of view when you realize that it is Gideon who is narrating. I loved it. I loved it so much.
I agree completely. The first book is first person, right?
Yeah, the first book I'm pretty sure is first person.
Which is why I had to argue that the perspective switches between the first two books, because in fact, it stays completely the same. It's Gideon the entire time. You just don't know it's Gideon.
Yeah, it's so good. I loved it. And that's one of those things that it just is brilliant how Muir is playing with your expectations and with perspective.
Absolutely. I can understand why it's hard. I, again, have no justification for why I love second person as much as I do, except for the deep respect I have for any author with the balls to try it.
I mean, but see, I don't think it was that hard. It was confusing a little bit in the sense that you don't necessarily know what's going on, but I don't think that second person is inherently more difficult to read than first or third person.
I think it can get cringy really fast. Okay, I've read some terrible second person poetry. Let's start with that. Now, I know poetry is not the same thing as a novel.
I've read a lot of bad second person fan fiction.
I think one sees a lot more second person perspective there. Just because when you have a shorter piece, it's easier to get experimental. You aren't asking as much from your reader, right? Come along with me on this journey. It's going to be real weird, but it's going to be only 5 minutes, I promise. You know?
It's definitely an easier ask.
Yeah. Versus writing 500 pages, not entirely in the second person, but
a lot of it.
Really want to give Muir a high five for having the fucking balls to do that.
And not just that, but I mean, again, the way that it transitions from second person to first person.
Oh, I did catch on that it was Gideon. I mean, it had to be, right?
I didn't catch on until she made the transition. But even if I had caught on, I think the fact that it transitions, I loved that. Because I think that a lot of the times when we do see second person in fiction, it stays that way. And so the fact that she was playing with this perspective, I really, really liked.
I mean, technically it was still second person, but well, no, I guess the definition is if the narrator is in the work.
Yeah.
So the narrator becomes in the work. But there's an in-world reason for it.
There was an in-world reason for it, but it definitely became first person.
Yeah, I forget that the technical definition is where the narrator is. Less than the grammar. You definitely caught on before they revealed it. There's a point where Gideon says, I think that she saw me behind her. Or is that what you're considering the transition?
I mean, that's kind of what I'm considering the transition.
Okay, because Gideon doesn't become part of the story at that point, but that's like the very obvious reveal, I would say.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's very good.
It is very good.
Deviating a little bit from the form of this book, I think it would be doing this book a disservice to just talk about the wild form the whole time, which we could do, but
we could, but I agree with you.
We did get distracted by fan fiction immediately.
We did. But also there's a lot more to this book than just the form.
Yeah, and more than just bones too.
There is some viscera. I'll grant you that.
Thank you. Something that I was struck by was the different intimacies of this book and how this book handled relationships on different levels. Now, Harrow pretty much declares that she's uninterested in romantic relationships many times. Is that just to get Ianthe to leave her alone? Maybe.
I don't know. I think it's genuine. I think she's interested in the body and she's interested in bones.
I agree. Gideon says she just loves bones, and I am inclined to agree with Gideon on everything. So I just didn't want to make that a concrete statement. But if you agree with me, then I'm willing to make it a concrete statement.
I will make it a concrete statement.
We see a couple of different moments. I think Ianthe and Harrow is not the first one, technically, by only a couple of pages. But Ianthe is sort of an antagonist. Enemies turned lovers could be a very fun trope that it does not get into. Because when Ianthe tries to kiss her, she's like, no. Gross. And that comes just pages after we see the lictors get drunk with God and then have a three-way with him, which
also comes after we've seen the lictor that at that point we know is Ortis, whose name we later learn is Gideon. What Harrow thinks is him having sex with Cyntheria's dead body, which is probably having sex with Cyntheria's dead body.
I would not call that an intimacy. That does not fit under my thesis statement for this section.
Physical intimacy, if not emotional intimacy.
I'm talking about emotional intimacy.
Okay.
And where it overlaps with the physical. They're not separate things entirely. But when you get to necrophilia, they are.
Yeah, I think dead body sex is probably does not have a lot in common with emotional intimacy.
But we see Ianthe and Harrow, who are doing they aren't doing the drunken hookup thing, but that scene evokes the drunken hookup thing. And then we see God and the lictors, who I feel like are more of a, when you're at sea, any port in a storm.
Yeah, I'd say they're any port in a storm.
It happens to be 3 at this moment, but I really get the sense that when you're an immortal being, the only people that you have any relationship with are the other immortal beings. And I think it's implied that they've hooked up several times.
That's kind of what they say. I mean, is that's the only person left for you. And I think that by the end of the book, it's more than just implied. Like they outright say that they've had relationships.
But because that they're basically the only ones available.
Yes.
I think that is they're not technically the only ones available. They could go sleep with humans, but it's not the same as someone who you actually know and who actually knows you.
And it's definitely not the same as having a relationship with someone that you know will still be there in 500 years, if that's your lifespan.
Absolutely. And so that there's an element of choice taken away from that, I would say. These characters aren't with each other because they want to be. They're with each other because they are, and they want to have sex. And the cause and effect there, I think, is very important.
Yeah.
And all of that was not that interesting to me until we then see Abigail and Magnus, who were 2 characters from the first book whose ghosts we see. We don't realize they're ghosts at first. They're in the like corrupted flashbacks of the novel, but they're just like really cute and married. And they don't do anything gross. They just really care about each other and love each other. And I think it's described as a sibling kiss. They like some smooches, some pecks.
The one time we really see them kiss, I think it's described as chaste.
I think the word sibling is specifically used. Which, yeah, because they're kind of in public. Like, obviously, they're not necking. It's a near-death experience, not a near-death experience, but they're probably about to die. They're already dead. It's complicated.
They're going to die for a second time. I mean, I have known some couples who would not care about the publicness, but
I think it's less about that and more that it's rote. They aren't kissing because they're trying to get it on. They're kissing as a show of emotional intimacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is a sign of the depth of their relationship and where their relationship is at.
It's the difference between kissing to prove something and just kissing because you want to.
Yeah.
That's all it had to be. It didn't have to be more than a peck. It was just an affirmation. And when Harrow sees their interaction, it is such a different version of intimacy than she has seen and experienced. She spent some time contemplating and describing it as like siblings, which is so interesting and horrifying and sad on so many levels.
I mean, Harrow has a very skewed view of the world. Harrow is actually a really sad character.
She is, and I love that we finally got to see that.
Yeah.
I think that was one of my, not problems with the first book, but I think my problems with the first book stemmed from not seeing her internal life.
I mean, I think that a lot of our argument about the first book was that a lot of those problems are implied, and yeah, we don't see them outright.
We see it through the lens of Gideon, who is not sympathetic towards Harrow at all.
I mean, no, she's not, but also Gideon's super messed up too.
Well, yes, but I'm always going to be on the side of the perspective character. If you didn't want me to, why did you make the book in that perspective?
I mean, I think that you can be both, but it's true that Harrow, because we see it from Harrow or from Gideon as Harrow's perspective, like you get a much richer sense of her personality and the struggles that she went through and how she dealt with being this isolated girl on, the ninth planet in the ninth house, whatever that place was called.
It was both of those things. Do we even want to? I don't even want to get into the God thing.
I mean, I just like that he's called John and is probably basically just an ordinary person who somehow got like godlike powers.
Oh, okay. That's something we can talk about. I'm such a sucker for post-apocalyptic fantasy.
Yes.
I fucking love it. And we found out, I mean, the 9 planets are our solar system, right? I'm pretty sure. God was like, John was like, oh yeah, there was too much climate change and also a nuclear war, so everyone died, and then I brought them back to life. And that's how I became God. And you're like, oh shit, he was just some weird, basically a mad scientist, except the lines between science and magic are blurred, and that's great.
Yeah, he was definitely just some weird dude who happened to like be at the right place at the right time and have the right skill set.
He was probably really good at what he did.
Probably.
But being really good at what you do and then becoming a god. But also, I don't think I would argue that he's not God. I mean, if he gave life to an entire solar system and sustains life for an entire solar system, that's a deity.
And he can bring himself back after basically being like dematerialized.
Yeah. I mean, he's got power.
He does have power. I think that he deserves the appellation of God.
I think I'm only so willing to call him that because he is so humble about it.
I think there's that, but I think there's also the fact that like the narrative shows off a lot of his like foibles.
Yeah, okay. The narrative and him are both humble about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, like the narrative is not trying to show us this all-powerful deity, even though he does have a lot of power, and he is essentially like a god, but that's not, we get this perspective of him as someone who makes mistakes, as someone who is called John, as someone who has a threesome with the two other people who have been there for the last 10,000 years because they've been there for the last 10,000 years.
Who regularly has threesomes? Whatever the definition of regularly is when your sense of time is 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really liked that. I think Abigail even says he never has claimed to be omniscient. There's a discussion in the underworld when they're talking about how God has never said anything about an afterlife.
And how he's fallible.
Yeah. But that's Abigail's response is, yeah, but he also doesn't know everything, and he has never said he does. And so just because he is their God doesn't mean I just love that concept.
Well, I think it's really interesting because we get two points of view of him, essentially. Like we get this point of view of him from the perspective of someone who absolutely believes that he is a deity, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what Harrow thinks. Harrow thinks he's a god. He is my god. But we also get from the narrative,
not just a god, like he is God.
Yeah, he is the god. But from the narrative, we get the perspective that actually he's just this, kind of normal dude who happens to be viewed as God by everyone else in the book.
And is trying to do his damned best.
Trying to do his best. He fails an awful lot, but he's trying to do his best. He's got some great dad jokes.
Oh my God, the dad joke. Holy shit.
I loved it so much.
When it's revealed that he's Gideon's father, and he just, oh my God. You can't, that's the kind of cheesy bullshit I expect from Gideon the Ninth.
It was so perfect. It was so perfect. I loved it.
I loved a lot of things about this book, an awful lot, but I would be remiss if I did not complain about the lack of choice, or more specifically, when there are very pivotal moments that could be really character building moments, and that choice is taken away from the character.
But that's the whole point.
Man, that's annoying.
But it's the whole point.
I wouldn't call that the whole point.
Okay, not the whole point, but I think that it is a major point that people have their choice taken away from them at these pivotal moments, and you can't always choose the way that you want to.
And I think that this book does a lot better job of exploring that concept than the first book did. So when it happens to Harrow, she can choose to either let something possess her or try to return to her body. But if she tries to return to her body, it might possess her anyway. That's not exactly, I'm not describing it well.
Well, I think the main bit is actually after the possession is no longer an issue, where she can return to her body and thus subsume Gideon's soul, or she can cross the river and who knows what'll happen.
So I feel like the first one was more obvious to me because Abigail tells her, oh, you know what? That is about Gideon.
It is about Gideon.
If her soul leaves, it might just return to her body anyway. It might not even pass on. Even if she tries to pass on, it might still return to her body just because that's what it's built to do. And so it renders the entire decision moot. And this book has set up that futility as a plot point much better. And so I was like, damn, that sucks. Whereas in the first book, it did not do that. And so when we got to Gideon's decision to sacrifice herself for Harrow, it bothered me immensely. Not her decision necessarily, but her narration around it. But I think that was addressed very well in this book. And that's why I think if I had read these books like one after the other, I would not have had such a problem as I did.
I agree that it's addressed in this book. I still disagree with you about your conclusions about Gideon. Like I think that it makes a lot of sense for Gideon's actions and for what we know about Gideon as a character then. But I do think that this book that Harrow does a good job of exploring the consequences of that and in making that impactful for like the choices and lack of choices at the end of the book.
The first book or the second, or both?
Both.
I mean, in Harrow, the second book, there's an entire section where I think it's a dialogue with Ianthe maybe, where she says, like, no one can say that Gideon committed suicide. It was not her choice to die. She just chose to make her death advantageous. And I really appreciated that, just having the literature acknowledge that. And all I said was that it bothered me, and so I can't be wrong about that. So
I mean, you can be wrong. Well, you can't be wrong about that statement. I will disagree with you. I don't think it should have bothered you, but
I don't think it would have bothered me if I had this exploration.
Well, it would have. The first book would have still bothered you. It just wouldn't have bothered you for as long.
If the whole narrative hadn't ended on that moment, it wouldn't have been like, excuse? I would have just kept going and kept reading and gone, oh, yeah, she's dealing with it. It's fine. Instead of, yeah, this is what happened. Stuck it. There would have been no downsides and only benefits if this was just one long book.
I'm not quite sure that's how it works, but I'm also quite sure that I never would have convinced you to read either if it was one very long book.
That's a me problem. That is a me problem. If we're talking
I think all of it is a you problem.
Hey, Sarah, before we move on to another conversation, I do have one question for you.
Yes, what's your question?
Shoot, screw, or marry?
Okay.
Abigail Pent, our sexy scientist. Ianthe, the villain, the sexy villain. Or Harrow, our main character.
Okay, ignoring the fact that I don't really want to screw anyone because I'm ace and I just don't want to screw anyone.
The point of the question is that you got to make hard decisions.
That's why I'm saying ignoring that, marry Abigail. Obviously, she's the best marriage material of the three of them. Like, no question.
I'm surprised you didn't pick the sexy antagonist.
Not for marriage.
Fair.
Normally, Ianthe would be my fuck option, but between Harrow and Ianthe, I like Harrow better. So Harrow's going to be fuck, and Ianthe is going to be kill.
All right. I tried to throw a wild card in there with trying to do the bad boy option, who you typically have a soft spot for.
I mean, I do have a soft spot, but not as much of one for Ianthe. I mean, I think Ianthe's great. I like Ianthe a lot as a character.
She got to kill someone. It's not your fault. You don't make the rules.
Yeah. Okay, so if you were going to shoot, screw, or marry someone, God, Cytherea, or Harrow/Gideon, who do count as one because they're sharing a body.
Oh, I would marry God. He's trying his best. He fucks up, but I could help. I could tell him the right decision a lot of the times, I think.
You're not going to be put off by his very bad dad jokes?
No. Are you kidding? That's peak marriage material.
A plus, not a negative.
And I would screw Harrow Gideon only if it was Gideon, because I don't think Harrow would be into it, and that would feel bad.
See, that's why I would screw Harrow, because neither of us would be into it. We would just kind of awkwardly be like, We'd get undressed. We'd maybe like touch each other once and be like, okay, we're done.
Well, you gave me the answer of /Gideon.
I did give you the answer of /Gideon.
So assuming Harrow was like, all right, take my body for a spin. Yeah, I think Gideon would be actually a terrible fuck, but I think she'd be enthusiastic. And then I have to kill Cytherea.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
I don't have the bad boy soft spot as hard as you do, I think.
No, but I'd kill her too. So
Okay. Wait, would you marry God or would you marry Harrow / Gideon?
actually, I think in this particular trio, I would probably kill God. Fuck Cytherea, marry Harrow, Gideon.
Oh, all right.
If it was a choice between Cytherea and Ianthe, I'd choose Ianthe any day.
Oh, I mean, out of the choices I gave you, I would fuck Ianthe.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
I think I'd have to kill a Harrow just because I only well, oh no. I mean, I obviously would marry Abigail.
Obviously.
It's not a question.
It's not a question.
Magnus and I can share. That would be fine. Or her real husband, that is.
Magnus would make a lot of jokes about stop flirting with my wife.
He wouldn't though, because I'd be allowed. Because she'd be my wife.
I think he would, but you would be allowed.
Oh, okay. No, I stand by what I said. I'd fuck Ianthe, and I think I'd have to kill Harrow. Well, it's not supposed to be an easy question, so it's all right that we struggled a little. All right, I heard you had a words are weird for us.
I was browsing Twitter before we got on this call to record, and I saw a tweet saying that apparently people who speak British English view the word frown as being a thing your eyebrows do instead of it being a thing your mouth does. And that was just wild to me. Like, it's just frowning. It's a thing that your mouth does when you're unhappy. It's not a thing necessarily that your eyebrows do independent of the rest of your face.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. There were two arguments in the thread that I saw, and unfortunately, I agree with both of them. The first one was, well, then how come a frowny face is this? Which is, a little emoji frowning with its mouth. Except, isn't that just the domination of American culture? Like, that's not actually a good argument.
I mean, I did see people saying, but that's not we have a different definition of frowny face.
The better argument, I think, was where are the frown lines? And there are some in between your eyebrows, and there are some down from the corners of your mouth. And so I think, therefore, a frown requires both.
Well, no. See, the interesting thing, I saw that argument too. And the American person said what we're calling, for the sake of this argument, frown lines. Like, we don't call them frown lines in the US. They have a different name. And in the UK, they were saying, well, the frown lines around your mouth, we don't call them frown lines. We call them a different name. So, like, that's a difference between language again.
No, we definitely call the thing in between your eyebrows frown lines.
I have literally never heard them called frown lines.
Yeah, they absolutely are.
No,
what do you call them then?
I don't call them anything.
Well, that's why you don't call them frown lines. You don't have a name for them at all. You can't say they're not called frown lines and then not offer a different name for them.
No, okay, so
glabellar lines? That's not anyone's colloquialism. I will fight you if you claim it is.
No, I'm not going to say that we actually call it that. Okay, I can't specifically find the thread where they were talking about the different actual muscle terms or whatever. But no, it's lines in your forehead are not, I don't call them frown lines. They're confused or whatever. It's not frowning.
It's not, well, bad podcasting. It's not this part of your forehead. It's in between them. It's this part.
That's I don't call that frown line.
Well, it is called a frown line.
It's not. It's not though.
It is not just by me. It's that's actually a thing.
It is not. I don't believe you.
I think it's absurd that anyone is arguing that a facial expression is only one part of your face. Have they never heard smiling with her eyes? Every fan fiction author knows that line. Mouths are not necessary for any of the expressions. It's a whole face situation all the time.
Or smiling except in your eyes.
Yeah, also very important. So it's not just frown. Like, all of the expressions require your entire face.
I mean, yes, but if you have to distill a frown to one aspect, it's not your eyebrows that I think of.
Fair. But I think they're a necessary component.
I disagree on how necessary. Either way.
Okay, how's this? If I put my eyebrows way up really high and then turn my mouth down, I just look amused.
I mean, yeah, because your eyebrows are really high.
Yeah, eyebrows are important for a frown.
Right, but that's not a frown. You look like confused. It's not a frown.
Wait, are you agreeing with me? I can't tell.
I am saying that you are not frowning when you make that face.
Because it's not just the mouth being downturned. The entire face is necessary to create that expression.
Right, but that's still not a frown.
Yes.
So I think you are agreeing with me. I'm not agreeing with you.
No, a true frown also requires eyebrows. A true frown requires both.
I am not sure I agree with there.
Because if it doesn't have the eyebrows, but the mouth is doing the same thing, then it's not a frown anymore, which you just said.
Yes, but if you have the eyebrows and you have the mouth, it's still not a frown. If you're doing other things with your eyebrows, then it's not a frown, like you just said.
I really think you're agreeing with me, Sarah.
I think you're agreeing with me.
Sure, okay. I don't understand how we're arguing right now.
It's a talent. It's a talent. Either way, wild thread. Words are weird. Frowns are weird. Isn't language fun?
Yeah, okay. I mean, yes. I agree with all those things. That's something we can agree on. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram and Hive at Fiction Fans Pod and Mastodon at Fiction Fans Pod at mastodon.social. I think there's too many social medias now. I can't keep track. Best place to find us is on our website or our link tree. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
But if you enjoyed this episode, you should rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And give us a follow wherever it is that your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find our show notes when we bother to post them, and a lot of other nonsense when we bother to post anything else.
Very little sober content on the Patreon.
Which is a plus or a minus depending on your point of view.
Thank you again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.